Mississippi Humanities Council, and this is our first ever Ideas on Tap in Tupelo, so we're very excited to be here. Couple things, we have food in the back, and if you know me at all, you know I hate wasting money on food, so please eat as much as you can, take some home. We would love for you to leave well fed. I want to thank a couple people at the outset of this program. I want to thank the Hardin Foundation for their support in this entire series that we've been doing on public education all around the state. We were in Hernando 2 nights ago, and we are in Tupelo tonight. I want to thank our current Humanities Council board member, Melanie Dees, for helping get the word out and advocating for us. And I want to thank our former MHC board member, Carla Faulkner, who is there, who also has been a huge help for this. I want to thank the Create Foundation and Mike Claiborne for his help and kind of helping get the word out and helping us plan part 2 of this, which will be September 12th. We will have a panel that will focus primarily on the issues that the Tupelo School District is facing. And so tonight is more of a larger, big picture policy sort of discussion. And the idea behind Ideas on Tap is to have these sorts of discussions in maybe unusual spaces. So we're not in the public library, we're not in an auditorium, we're in a bar. And so that's intended to create kind of an informal, fun atmosphere. So if you'd like to get a drink, I'm sure the folks here at the Thirsty Devil would be pleased with that. And we want to thank the whole team here at Thirsty Devil for hosting us. The idea behind this series is to look at, to try to have a discussion about public education policy and do it by focusing at the ideas that are behind those policies. And what I realized is that the differences between these sort of approaches are not technical, but rather they reflect really different values. And so our goal is to better understand this and to have a civil exchange of ideas. And that is as much true for the panel as it is the audience. We have a diverse panel ideologically, and we have a diverse audience ideologically. And that's the whole idea behind this program. So I thank you for coming out. And I know that sort of education is an issue that people can feel very, very strongly about. But I urge you to listen respectfully to our panelists, especially if you don't agree with them. And we will have time at the end for audience questions, so if you've got something that you really want to say, you'll have a chance to say it. So let me introduce our panel this evening. To my left is Nancy Loome. Nancy is the Executive Director of the Parents Campaign. Their vision as an organization is to engender a public education system that affords all students excellent public schools, so that children can become what they dream. Their mission is to ensure a brighter future for Mississippi children by promoting better public schools through parent advocacy. By giving parents a means by which their voices can be heard, they are working together to change our state for the better. To my right, I guess this wasn't intentional, that kind of works out that way. To my right, left and right, is the founder and president of Empowered Mississippi, Grant Callen, which is an independent, nonprofit advocacy organization dedicated to removing barriers to opportunity so all Mississippians can flourish. Empower believes that Mississippians should have an opportunity to make choices that improve their lives and envision a Mississippi where every child has access to a high-quality education and parents have the freedom to choose the best educational setting for their children. They have also been very active in working for criminal justice reform in Mississippi. And to my far left is Stewart McMillan, our kind of local talent here, our kind of local sort of bringer. Stewart is a graduate of Tupelo High School. After college, she worked for Teach for America and taught 5th and 6th grade English language arts at a charter school in Nashville, Tennessee. Later, she worked as an administrator for the Achievement School District in Nashville and Memphis, and she came back to Mississippi and served as the Deputy Director and Interim Executive Director of the Mississippi Charter School Authorizer Board. And for about a year now, she has been the Innovation Program Facilitator of the Tupelo School District. So please give a round of applause to our panelists. And I want to give Stewart a special thanks because our third panelist, Rachel Cannon, was unable to be here at the last minute, so she agreed. I was talking to her yesterday afternoon, talked her into doing this, so please be nice. Thank you, Stewart, for doing that. I really appreciate it. I try to start these things by giving a little bit of background, a little bit of historical perspective. I'm a historian by training, and the Humanities Council believes that understanding the history is important to understanding our sort of current issues. So I want to give you a very short overview of the history of public education in Mississippi to help put tonight's conversation in context. The issue of public education has been around for over 200 years. In 1802, an address to the territorial legislature, Governor W.C.C. Claiborne calls for free public schools in the territory. They didn't listen to him, but he talked about it. In the 1840s, again, the legislature has a debate about whether they should create a statewide system of public schools. Those did not exist at the time. And in fact, the legislature chose not to create a system of public schools because schools at the time were seen almost as a luxury, right? Farmers didn't see the need to send their kids to school. Craftsmen learned their trade through the apprenticeship system. And remember that a majority of Mississippi's population were enslaved, and it was illegal to educate them. So there wasn't the ground support, or folks didn't see the benefit of creating a taxpayer-funded system of public education. The big turning point here is the Civil War, as the Reconstruction government, for the first time, Mississippi creates a system of public schools, partly to help educate the now 436,000 formerly enslaved who were now free. Mississippi's 1870 school law established a statewide system of free schools that would be financed by a tax and authorized school boards in counties and municipalities to build schools to meet local demands. In fact, we have some leaders of local school districts here with us. Thank you for coming. Of course, as we know, separate schools for black and white were created at the time, and this was codified in the 1890 state constitution. So we had a dual system of white and black, and of course, as we know, they were not equal. This system was challenged in the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education ruling, and we can say that Mississippians, or white Mississippians, were particularly resistant to the Brown decision. And in the mid-1960s, there was a policy called freedom of choice that was an attempt to follow federal court dictates. That plan was adopted in many places, but really it was a way of maintaining segregation. Also in the 1960s, the legislature created a system of tuition grants to help white families afford private schools, which were growing at tremendous numbers at the time because of the threat of integration. This growth continues significantly after 1970, after the federal courts ruled that the state had to integrate its public schools. And so in many parts of the state, not really in Tupelo, interestingly, large numbers of whites left the public schools to establish private academies to maintain racial segregation. The number of private schools in the state just grows incredibly in the late 60s and early 70s. And in many places, public resources were used to support these new private schools, these segregation academies. So, putting aside the issue of integration, and I want to try to come back to it later today in our discussion, Mississippi has always ranked low in educational outcomes. 1982 is an important year in the history of education in Mississippi. Prior to that, Mississippi was the only state that didn't have a public kindergarten program. Only 45% of children who began first grade finished the 12th grade, and the state had the nation's second highest rate of illiteracy. And only 10%, and as many as 10% of kids didn't attend school at all because the mandatory attendance laws had been repealed during the Civil Rights era. The Education Reform Act of 1982, which passes very, very narrowly during a special session, helped to bring about some change here. But it sort of makes us remember that raising taxes to expand public education has never been easy in this state. In 1997, the Mississippi Adequate Education Program was established, and the idea behind the MAEP was to help raise student achievement and lessen the funding divide between wealthy and poor districts, and creating a funding formula that's designed to ensure a basic, adequate level of school funding. Since the formula was created in 1997, the legislature has only fully funded it twice, and there have been efforts to revise and change the formula, which I'm not sure if we'll see again this next session. So all this is to say is these sort of debates are not new to Mississippi. All right, so let's turn to our panelists who know a lot more about this than I do. I want to begin with sort of the big picture question, and I know that we're going to dive deep into these issues over the course of the next hour, but just to give us kind of a quick summary, what is, in your mind, the state of public education in Mississippi today, and how can we make it better?
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Maybe you can pass it.
Yeah.
I am delighted to be here. This is our fourth of these, as Stewart mentioned, and each of these have truly been a delight to engage in these discussions in a forum like this. So thank you for hosting us. Thank you for allowing me to come. Big picture question, sort of where are we in public education? And I would say there's a lot of great things to point to in public education, particularly in the last 10 years. We have seen some important achievement growth. There's a lot to celebrate. Our organization has focused mostly on the parts of the state where public education hasn't historically done well. And more so, we have focused on the families who have historically not been served well by traditional public education. And so when you talk about where public education is in Mississippi, I would describe it as a tale of two cities. It's a tale of two states. For people that have some kind of financial resources, there's a lot of great things going on in public education. There are communities that have a wealthy base where public education is doing great and it's providing great opportunities for kids. They're being prepared for life. They're on a track to college. I live in Madison. We have some world-class public schools. The challenges that I see are if you are African American, if you are low income, or if you are special needs, there's a great chance that our public school system is not serving you well in Mississippi. 82% of the students in failing districts in Mississippi are African American. When you look at academic proficiency, poor students trail rich students by 27 percentage points. Students with special needs trail those who don't have special needs by 25 percentage points. And even in some of our best school districts, Oxford is a great example of this. Oxford is a great school system, but there is still a huge achievement gap. In fact, Oxford has one of the highest achievement gaps in the state, where the achievement gap between white and black students in the Oxford School District is 51%. 51 points for black and white, and economically disadvantaged students have a 46.5 achievement gap. So it's not that public school isn't working. It is working well in some places and for some families and for some students. But where it's not, we've got to try something different. And so we have supported a range of policies to help that. We're going to get into some of those tonight. For us, that's looked like giving parents more choices within that system. Sometimes that's a charter school. Sometimes it's an education scholarship account. These are in Mississippi, they've always been targeted on those who are not being served in traditional public school. Charters are focused on D and F rated districts, and the ESA program is focused on students with special needs. And I'm thrilled with the way those programs are working to provide a lifeline for kids who need it.
Well, I have some good news for you. State test scores came out today, and as we have in the past, Mississippi children continue to improve their achievement, and that's good news. But here's the even better news, and this is a story that you probably don't hear or haven't heard. Our national test scores also tell us that our teachers are doing amazing work here in Mississippi, and that is by and large statewide. So here's what our national test scores tell us. First of all, and I checked these, we had a debate about this on Tuesday, I checked these numbers and I was right. Ever since they started keeping the data, which is in 1992, ever since then, consistently, Mississippi has outpaced the national average in improvement in our national test scores. All those years, all those decades, Mississippi has been improving at a faster rate than the rest of the nation. Now, everybody's improving, and so we're chasing a moving target, and that makes it harder for us to climb up in the rankings, but we have climbed in the rankings, and here's what's even better news. So one of the things that Grant mentioned, he's right that, and I think Stewart mentioned it too, that children who live in poverty, in every single state, this is true, children who live in poverty, on average, there are exceptions, but on average, score lower on standardized tests than their relatively more affluent peers. And it's not because of their ability, it's because of a lack of resources. It's because they don't have access to all of the things that their more affluent peers have access to. And so we've known for a very long time that if we want them to have the same shot at success as their more affluent peers, we've got to give them more resources in school. And just about everybody who delves into education policy agrees with that. But these national test scores, this is the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is the way we compare school achievement state to state. They let you disaggregate the test score information, which means you can compare similar types of students across states. And so we can compare our children who live in poverty in Mississippi and their achievement to the similar children in every state. And that gives you a better look at how our teachers are doing at moving those groups of children forward. And here's what we know. In our most recent round of national test scores, we disaggregate the data. We test in 2 subjects, reading and math, and we test in 2 grades, 4th grade and 8th grade. And when you disaggregate the data, what you find is absolutely remarkable. In 4th grade math, when you disaggregate, if you compare our poor students to everybody else's poor students, our non-poor students to everybody else's non-poor students, we are 12th in the nation in achievement. Not bad. 12th in the nation. And so if you took and in every subject in every grade, it is similar. We're 12th, 15th, 24th, and 34th in the nation in those 4 areas, 4th and 8th grade math, 4th and 8th grade reading. And what that tells you is that if you took our same population in Mississippi and you put it in any other state with their teachers, in most states, our students would do worse than they do here because our teachers are doing a remarkable job, and they are doing it with fewer resources than almost every other state. Okay, they're doing it with very little money going into pre-K, with very little money per student in our school districts, and so our class sizes are larger. Imagine what we could do if we invested in our schools like other states invest in theirs. We know what things work. We know that high-quality pre-K is enormously successful in moving children forward, and that lasts throughout their schooling. We know literacy coaches really help improve reading in the lower grades. We know that lower class size matters, especially for children in low-income households and that sort of thing who need more attention. So we know what things work. We just haven't had the political will to invest in them like other states have. So the news is really good. Mississippi children, we all know this, Mississippi children are as bright and full of promise as the children in any other state. We just haven't given ours the resources that other states have given theirs. And we have a terrific opportunity, y'all. Coming up August 27th, we've got a runoff in the election. And then in November, we've got a general election. And we have a chance to elect people who will invest in our schools the way other states invest in theirs. And when we do that, our kids, there's no telling where our kids will go. And that means that Mississippi will finally meet her potential as a state. And that's really exciting. So thank you, teachers. Do we have any teachers in here? We love you, teachers. You are terrific, and you are doing a terrific.
One disclaimer I should say that my panelists are free to make whatever statements they want in terms of politics. That's great. Just know that this forum and the Humanities Council, do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Humanities Council. We are a nonpartisan organization. We create the forum for these opinions to be expressed. So that's all. I know, but you can't.
Well, I'll echo some of Nancy's sentiments. I really appreciate her opening and talking about the achievement data that came out today and focusing on our state as a whole. It's a really exciting time to see that since the math assessment started in 2015-2016 school year, that proficiency has risen from about 30%, 33 in math and ELA, to closing in on that 50% mark. So we have a lot to be proud of. There's a bright future coming down the pipeline. I'd love to, just on a slightly different note, I think one of the things that our state hasn't done as good a job of in comparison to other states is focusing on both college and career readiness. And I see that that's something that nationally the conversation is shifting from just all students should go to college to there's a bucket of students that careers are really the way for them to focus. And I think that our state, in changing the graduation requirements so that students who are in 10th grade right now moving forward will have to take a college and career readiness class. And schools have the autonomy to decide how that looks for them and what fits best in their structure. But I think that that is a step in the right direction for our state and aligns with some of the national conversations about we should be focusing on all students meeting their full potential, and that looks differently for some kids. So I'm excited both in terms of what we're seeing at our state in terms of data and also the focus on making sure all students are prepared for college and career readiness.
Great. That's good. A very, very positive opening. That's great. So now is the part where I get to ask really tough questions. And let me start with Graham. And now the educational savings accounts, how that works is basically parents can take money out of public education and then use that to apply to private school tuition. It's currently set up for people with special needs children whose needs aren't being met in the public schools. But I think it's fair to say that if you had your way and magic wand, you would widen it to cover everybody. And so my question is kind of two-part. One, does using public money for private schools serve the common good or the public good? And if that program grows and vouchers or ESAs are expanded, does it have the potential of substantially weakening public schools? And would it have a negative effect on a place like Tupelo, which has really thrived over the last several decades because of its strong public school system? So some folks might see that this idea as a threat. How do you respond to that?
Sure. Well, I would reject one of the comments you made, and that is that it takes money away from public education, because to date the program has not been funded through the funding formula. There's a specific prohibition in the program that it not be funded through the funding formula and that it come from new money. So it has not taken any money from public education. Here's how I would answer this. I think over the last few years it has been really detrimental to the conversation about education across our state that there has been a choose your side approach to education, not amongst families, not amongst parents, but amongst the political class and the policymakers and the interest groups. There has been you're either with us or against us. And when you talk to families across the state, families recognize that all kids are unique. They are different with different learning styles. They learn in different paces. They have different interests. I'm convinced our schools ought to look as diverse as our children are, and they ought to look as unique as our children are. And so what the goal of education scholarships have been about from the very beginning is to try to provide a lifeline for kids who are not being served in the traditional public education system. It has never been to do anything to disrupt the great schools that are operating in many corners of our state. The The Special Needs ESA was created in response to a crisis. There was a crisis in special education that has begun to improve, but is far from solved. At the time the program was created, 23% of students with special needs were graduating. 23%. That means the rest were not graduating. There was a lot of conversations about what can we do to solve this. And many legislators stepped up and said, let's create this innovative solution that is providing results in other states. Let's do a pilot program. Let's make it start small, scale as demand grows, and try to give parents another option. And there were some really critical protections in place to make sure it got to the families who needed it. First of all, you have to have an IEP to be eligible. So we weren't talking about kids, homeschool kids that suddenly wanted to have their education paid for. We're talking about kids who had been in the public school system, had been diagnosed with a special need, and needed something else. So that was first. Second, there's a myriad of protections to ensure that the money cannot be misspent. And it is currently, the current program is currently administered by the Department of Education, and there has been no fraud. Thirdly, there was an emphasis on, we want parents to control the money, not the schools. And so sometimes a voucher program, traditional voucher program, ends up being controlled by the private schools because you can only use a voucher at a private school. An ESA, an education scholarship account, is different because parents get a spending account that the state controls, and there's protections to make sure it's not misspent. But you can spend it on tuition, you can spend it on tutoring, you can spend it on therapy, assistive technology, all things that if you have a child with special needs, you know you're struggling to afford these things. And so that's the way the program has worked. And there are going to be 800 plus families in the program this fall. The state did a report and found that 91% of parents were satisfied with the program compared to 20-something% who were satisfied with their previous school. We know they're being served at nearly 100 schools around the state. It has provided a lifeline, and it's done nothing to hurt traditional public education. And for the amount of time that has been spent talking about it as if it was the end of days for public education, we're talking about, it was $3 million, and now it's $5 million, and it's 800 kids out of nearly 500,000 traditional public school kids. So it's a tiny program serving a few kids who need it. There are a million protections in place to make sure it works, and I'm proud of the results it's been delivering. Now, to your second part of your question is about expansion. We support expansion. We have, at every case, said there are more than just students with special needs who are falling behind. And so every proposal we have supported has given priority to students who are in poverty or students who are in a failing school district. And so we have had, at our core, we're a parent organization, and we represent parents all over the state who come and say, well, I don't have a child with special needs, but I live in Rolling Fork, or I live in Meridian, or I live in Moss Point, and my child is falling behind, and they're not getting what they need, and they don't have special needs, but we need something else. And so the goal, our goal is to see it expanded to other constituencies of need, and we would love to see the legislature support the expansion at the same time the program grows in demand. This was the first year, we had a big waiting list before this year, and I'm thankful the legislature stepped up, expanded it to meet the waiting list, and we're already seeing the school year has just started, and we already have a waiting list for next year. So I hope they will continue to expand it to meet the needs of the kids on the waiting list.
I'm sure Nancy wants to respond, and I'm going to give you a chance, but I also want to give you your tough question. And obviously, you've been a strong opponent of the ESA program, and I think you used those statistics that earlier that if you take out children who come from poor backgrounds, we're actually doing pretty well nationally. The problem is we can't really do that in reality. So what about? So it's easy to be a strong supporter of public schools in a place that has strong public schools. What about those people who live in F districts where the schools are not successful, who don't have don't have the funds to send their kids to private school? What do you say to those parents who see this program and greater choice as their best chance to give children a good education?
Thank you. Well, first let me correct something. I didn't say that we do better if we take our poor children. I said when you compare our poor children to every other state's poor children, we do better than the other states. And when you compare our non-poor children to everybody else's non-poor children, we do better than other states. So I'm not at all suggesting that we need to get rid of our children who are not economically advantaged. Quite the opposite. Our public school system is the lifeline for those children, and it is the only place where those children are guaranteed an opportunity to get the education they need to thrive and to be successful. So the role of government, the reason that we have a public education system is that our ancestor, people who came before us, decided a long time ago, and I agree strongly with them, that the quality of life for everyone improves when we have an educated citizenry. Okay, we all do better when we all do better. Or when we have an educated citizenry, everyone thrives, or at least has quality of life improved. Even if you don't have a child who's participating in the public education system, you benefit from that in all kinds of ways. And when we diminish that, we diminish quality of life for everyone. So that's why we have public education. When you start to whittle that away, and the whole idea is that if I have to fund that myself, I can't afford it, okay? But if everybody pays in a little bit, then everybody can have something good. When you start to break that down and you say, here, you take yours and go do with it whatever you want to, and you take yours and go do with it whatever you want to, we are all diminished because we all get something less. Does that make sense? It's terribly inefficient. It doesn't work. It only works when we all invest into the same thing. Now, there are all kinds of reasons that some parents might want their children in private schools. We've seen that over the decades. And some of those reasons, I would sympathize with. And some of those reasons, I do not. And there was a time in the 60s that Stewart mentioned earlier where our government subsidized white flight from the schools because parents didn't want their children going to school with black children. Is that really, do we really think that that is a good thing for our tax dollars to subsidize? So the idea that we as a society should use our tax dollars to pay for any choice that any parent would make about their children's education I just disagree with that on its face. I think that's wrong. I think we all should contribute to something that is available to everyone, and that using our tax dollars to subsidize tuition to private schools that reject children, that exclude children whose parents are paying those tax dollars, that's wrong. I just don't agree with that. I think that's wrong. So to Grant's comments about the way that the ESA program works and the fact that it doesn't take away from public schools, we have a finite number of dollars that can be appropriated in our state, right? And when you spend them on one thing, you can't spend them on another. And it is the perennial problem that our legislature faces, is that we never have enough money to do all of the things that we need to do. Our roads and bridges are in terrible, terrible shape. Some of our school facilities are in terrible shape. So, and we've underfunded education every year except a couple. And so we never have enough funds. And so the idea that we can take these dollars and spend them on something else without diminishing everything else is just ridiculous. We can't do that. The expansion that he's talking about wanting, there was a bill that was proposed this past legislative session that would have done that, and it would have cost in the first year over $200 million. Of course that would hurt our public schools. This push for privatizing public education is not unique to Mississippi. It's a national push. And those national organizations fund grants organization. And they haven't been shy about sharing their strategy, especially when they go out on the road and do their fundraisers. They've shared what their strategy is. Their number one step, their very first step in their strategy for getting legislatures to successfully pass voucher programs, the number one step is to starve public schools of the resources they need to be successful, because they know that if they diminish public education, then parents will want something. If parents feel like the public schools can't provide a good education, then they will want something else. And so they are actively working to diminish public education so that parents will want something else. So it's simply not true that these voucher programs don't hurt public schools. When we all go different places, it hurts the greater good. And our tax dollars are supposed to go for the greater good. I want to give one more personal example of that. When we moved back to Mississippi, my twin daughters, or our older children, were 3 years old, and we really looked hard at communities to choose a community that shared our values. And the thing that we chose Clinton, and the reason that we chose Clinton was because of the way their public schools are structured. And the way that the public schools in Clinton are structured is that every single kindergarten child goes to the same kindergarten school. We don't have schools and have not schools. We have one school for kindergarten and first grade, and we have one school for second and third grade. And so my children had the wonderful blessing to go to school with children who look just like Mississippi. Half the children in their classes were in low-income households. They went to school with children of every race and religion and background that you can think of. And I believe when our children grow up together and we are in community together and we're cheering for the same team together, we do better as a people. I think one of our biggest problems in our country today is that people are afraid of people who are different from them. And we see that manifest itself in really terrible outcomes, in really terrible ways. One of my twin daughters is now about to get married. She's getting married in a month. One of her bridesmaids is Jewish. One of her bridesmaids is Catholic. Some of her bridesmaids are Protestant. One of her bridesmaids is Indian. One of her bridesmaids is African American. And this is what my house has looked like their whole time going through school. They have had this beautiful opportunity to love people who are different, who have differences from them, and they also have things about them that are very much alike. That is a value that I love, and we have one place where all of those children are welcome, and that is in our public schools. There is only one school system that is open to every child, and that is in our public schools. It is worth our investment. It is worth our commitment. Certainly, I don't begrudge parents the opportunity to send their children somewhere else if that's what they want. But they shouldn't use my tax dollars to pay for those choices. They should pay for it themselves. We do have some schools that need to do better. And we owe it to those children to do whatever it takes to make sure that their schools are better. Excusing a few children from the school to go somewhere else doesn't help the greater good. It doesn't help all the children who are left, which is by far the majority of the children. Our obligation is to the majority of the children. Our obligation is to do whatever we need to do to make sure that their public schools provide them the lifeline that they need to be successful, productive citizens.
And I'm sure Grant wants to respond, and you'll have a chance in just a second, but let me go to Stewart first. You've seen a version of school choice, charter schools, in 2 different states now, both Mississippi and Tennessee. So I would love to get your perspective on how in your mind, have charters improved public education in your experience? And if so, how? And how do you assess Mississippi's relatively new charter system and charter law?
Well, first, I want to state that in terms of charter schools, you can look at charter schools in kind of two different lights, and I do think that that context matters. And the first is that in some states, you can have schools that charter schools can have a for-profit organization connected to that school, and there can also be charter schools that are connected to nonprofit organizations. And in our state, in Mississippi, the charter law only allows for nonprofit organizations. So all charter schools in Mississippi are public schools. That's not the case in other states. And I know I gave Stewart the example talking on the phone. In South Carolina, that's not the case. And there are some for-profit organizations that, in my opinion, are doing harm to students that are not educating at the level that they need to. So in both Tennessee and my experience in here in Mississippi, I've been blessed to work with nonprofit organizations that are connected to charter schools. I think charter schools at their core are trying and have the autonomy to do things that are innovative and different, and to be able to do what's in the best interest of students. And in most cases, when charter schools are effective, they have an authorizer board, an entity that is holding them accountable, both in terms of whatever the state accountability metrics are, as well as heightened accountability metrics across that authorizer board and those expectations. I think that if you look at the national conversation related to charters as a whole, it's a mixed bag. You have charters that are doing very well. You have the Yes Preps in Texas. You have the KIT network. And even with KIT, you have very varied results across different regions. And then you have some schools that are not doing well. And full disclosure, I taught at New Vision Academy in Nashville, Tennessee. We were a reward school when I was teaching there, so we were in the top 25% in terms of growth, not in terms of straight proficiency. But there were a lot of issues there, and my school closed last year. And for reasons related to being under consideration related to fraud and related to not meeting the needs of special education students. And so that should happen. Schools that are not meeting the needs, charter or not, should be closed. I mean, there is a conversation there that needs to be happening. But as a whole, I agree with the idea of allowing schools with the appropriate accountability to be able to try to do innovative things to best meet the needs of students. And I think a shortfall that I see in charter schools, both here in Mississippi and in Tennessee and nationally, is we should all be trying to do better for all students. And if we are doing things, charter or not, that are good and beneficial for students, we should be sharing those. And that would be something that I would hope, and that's something when I served on the authorizer board and when I called Dr. Wright to say, I'm leaving to take this role as the innovation program facilitator in Tupelo, I said to her, I hope that anything that we do that is innovative that we can share out. And I hope that with a working relationship with some of the school staff that conversation of the partnership of charter schools, of innovative schools, of districts of innovation, we should all be working to do better for our students. And my kind of personal mantra related to that, when I was at the ASD, Chris Barbick, who founded Yes Prep, and who was our superintendent there, he always said, a rising tide raises all ships. And I feel very strongly about that. We should all be trying to get better together. We should all be sharing things that are working. We should also be transparent about the things that aren't, so we can avoid any of those shortcomings and get better faster.
I'm glad you raised the issue of accountability, because I want to ask some accountability questions. And I didn't get a chance to ask this to Nancy on Tuesday, so I want to start with that, and then I'll come to Grant.
You're going to let me respond?
Yeah. I mean, well, do you want me to go next to you? I mean, I was trying to vary the order so you don't always go first. Go ahead. All right. I thought hard about this. The thing about accountability and what Stewart said about school that fails should be closed. I mean, how should we hold public schools and districts accountable for their performance? And how can we make sure that the education money is spent effectively, that it reaches the classroom and not going too much toward administration, as the state auditor has recently claimed?
Thank you for that question. You know, some of the most innovative things that happen in our public schools, and let me just go ahead and say that the idea that we don't have innovation in public schools is ridiculous. And we have had an education chairman who, in the Senate, who would say that, you know, that our public schools, that Rip Van Winkle woke up today, the only thing that would look the same is our public schools. Really? We had children working on MacBooks 100 years ago and smart boards and online assessments, and our schools look nothing like they looked even 15 years ago. So there's lots of innovation happening in our public schools, and we need to do more. We need to constantly be thinking about that. So your question was?
How do we make sure that the money is spent effectively?
Okay, so some of the most innovative things that we're doing are implemented by administrators. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to spend the majority of our money on administration. We don't. We have a cap. It's like 5% that districts can't exceed on administrative expenditures. But the idea that all administrative expenditures are bad is crazy. And that's actually one of the things that charter schools, I think, have done well in relieving classroom teachers of some of their burdensome paperwork and that sort of thing. But they have to have administrators to do that. And community outreach is very, very important, particularly in districts that are high poverty districts, to help parents understand the curriculum and understand how to help their children and how be involved in their schools and feel comfortable in their schools. And those are largely administrative tasks. So not all administrative expenditures are bad. When the MAEP was passed, the first accountability regulations also were passed. That's when accountability really kicked in and started in Mississippi. And the deal was that the legislature kind of made a deal with public schools. They said, we're going to set a bar, and we're going to hold you to this standard. But we're going to give you the resources that you need to meet that standard that we're asking you to meet. And we're going to let you decide how to spend your money. We're just saying, we're going to hold you to this bar. You figure out how to do it, we're going to hold you accountable. Now, we know who has upheld their end of that bargain and who has not. The legislature has not provided the resources that they promised, right? They have not fully funded the MAEP. They have continued to hold schools accountable and to raise the bar. And so that's a pretty one-sided deal. But so to the question of should we close schools if they don't do well? We certainly need to do something when schools are not doing well, right? We've got to do something. We also have to have a fair accountability model that doesn't change constantly. We've got to stop moving the bar constantly. What we've been doing in recent years is schools work really hard and they move up a level, and then we reset the cut scores and push them back down to the previous level, and that's not fair, right? That's not fair. So we need a fair accountability system that doesn't do that. And we need a way to help those schools improve. Now, can you just shut down a school? If you have one elementary school in a district and you shut it down, those children have to go somewhere to school. And we know we have a teacher shortage crisis. And so you can fire all your teachers, but you've got to staff your school with somebody. And so it's a challenge, it's a problem, and it's one that we need to figure out, but it's not a solution that anybody in any state has really figured out. The reason that we can close a charter school and not have that problem is that they have a public school a traditional public school to go back to. There is a school there for them to go to. So you have to provide something for students, and I think that's the idea behind the new achievement school district in Mississippi, is that the idea is that the people in charge haven't done a good enough job, and so we're going to put someone else in charge. And so we're going to absorb those really lowest performing school districts into the achievement school district and let someone else be in charge and hopefully move those up. And some other states have done that. Tennessee did that, and Louisiana has done that. And I will say it is I think you would agree with me, it is a tremendous challenge. Those schools, they haven't skyrocketed to A level. I mean, it is, and it nearly killed Chris Barbick, literally. He had a heart attack, yes, as a very young man. He worked day and night. And that's one of the things with some of the schools. It's a huge challenge. I know some of the charter schools that have been really successful in moving children pretty dramatically toward more success. One of the things that we know is that typically they are staffed with very young teachers who are not married and don't have families, and they work about 80 hours a week. And it's just not sustainable, and it's not scalable. Which means you can't find enough of those people to staff all of our schools, even all of our low-performing schools. And what it also tells us is that what we are asking our schools to do is really, really hard. And so parental support is important, community support is important, resources are important. No state has it figured out. It's hard work. But again, I would say allowing a few students to just go somewhere else. And let me also say this about school choice and private schools. Okay, I'll go quick. There's no accountability for those private schools. And the people who pay attention know that most of them provide a far inferior education than our public schools do. If they took the same state tests that our public schools take, you would see that clearly. So many of our little private schools just do not provide a quality education. And so we got to think about how we want to use our tax dollars.
And I have to apologize, I kind of boxed Grant out from earlier. So Grant, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to Nancy's comments earlier, but also respond to her point again about accountability. What accountability requirements are there for the ESA schools?
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't know what an ESA school is, but
Private school, I'm sorry.
okay. So
That gets public money.
parents get public money and they shop around and find the best setting. I got interested in this because I met a lady 8 years ago named Cynthia Jackson. And she was, at the time, and is a single mother to a 5th grader named Will. And she lived in Canton Public Schools. And I got to know her because she worked at St. Dominic's as a medical technician, but didn't make a lot of money. And she was watching her son, a 5th grader, who had big dreams, wanted to be a doctor when he grew up. She was watching him fall further and further behind in Canton Public Schools. As she watched him fall, she watched his friends slip into the gang culture, and she saw violence and drugs and disrupted classrooms, and she knew, she could see where her son was going, and she saw nothing that she could do to stop it. And I got to know her, and she came to the Capitol to advocate for additional education options. After I got to know her, I have heard versions of that story in school district after school district across the state. And I will repeat what I said at the beginning. Our effort is not about all of the wonderful things that Nancy talked about that are happening in our public schools. We need people that are full-throated champions of public education. I celebrate that, and I'm thrilled that she celebrates that. We also need people that champion families and students who are being left behind in communities across our state. We don't have to hurt public schools to achieve that, but let's do something to provide a lifeline for them. So I talked to Cynthia the other day. It had been a year since I talked to her, and I called her. This was back in May, and I said, Cynthia, whatever happened to Will? She said, well, there's good news and there's bad news. She said, the good news, he got out. He went to Germantown High School in Madison. He got a great high school education. He has got a job now. He's going to be in community college this fall, and he's taken pre-med classes, and he's planning to go to medical school. I said, well, what's the bad news? She said, I sent him away to live with his father because I could not get him into Madison any other way. We tried a district transfer. We tried private school. I couldn't afford the tuition. I had to live my son's high school days apart from him, and I had to sacrifice so he could get a better education. When Nancy says we do not have schools and have not schools, that is simply not true. When Nancy says our public schools are open to everybody, that is simply not true. For Cynthia, she drove past beautiful Madison schools every day and knew that those schools were not open to her. She did not have the money to afford to buy residential housing in Madison. She did not have the money to move to a place that had better education. And so what I'm trying to say is when we create this system where you have to be on team public school, or you're against it, or you're against families, or you're against kids, that is detrimental to our state. It's moving us in the wrong direction. We've got to recognize that kids are different and they need different things. And in places where we have great public schools, great, let's celebrate it. In places where we don't, let's work to improve them. But in the meantime, let's give parents a choice. And if it looks like a charter school, fantastic. I'm thrilled with the parents who are seeing their kids finally achieve and be stretched and be challenged in the charter schools in Jackson and the charter school in Clarksdale. If it looks like a private school in some places and kids with special needs are getting their needs served, fantastic. We should want that for everybody. But making us choose a side is not helpful. Our organization supports virtually everything that the Parents Campaign supports. We want world-class public schools. The difference is they spend a lot of time trying to stop us and trying to stop parents who are just trying to help their kids.
We always run long. All right, so I got one more question, and then we're going to give it to the audience, and I want to ask it to Stewart, because Tuesday night we were in Hernando, and we kind of fixed on a point that we didn't really explore, but I think you can help us, and that is, if the current structure of a public school district is not working, how can a public school become innovative in a way that a private school or a charter school might be able to? Talk about how we can make public school systems, maybe even large public school systems, innovative, and what's happening here in Tupelo.
Well, I appreciate Nancy made the comment that public schools can be innovative, and I agree with that fundamentally. And I think that we're in a great place right now where, with the opportunity to apply to be a district of innovation, there's even more of a focus on a realization that there are state process accountability standards that have hindered the ability for schools to do everything that they'd like to do. So we, the Tupelo Public School District, are excited to be applying to be a district of innovation. And what that looks like for us also involved a broad community effort that started last year, because I think we have to be focused at the beginning on what are our greatest needs, so that we can then work to find innovative ways to meet those needs. And if we're not transparent and we don't look at and confront our brutal facts, we're not going to be able to be innovative and to best meet the needs of all students. So we were blessed to go through a comprehensive process. We hosted 14 stakeholder meetings. We released a survey. We had over 900 people give feedback, and we're able to identify some of our greatest needs and areas we needed to address, and are now in the process of both already implementing programs to best meet those needs, as well as looking at what more could we do if we could get some waivers from state requirements to best meet the needs of kids. And I think going a little bit back to some of the previous conversation about special education, I feel pretty strongly that that is a subgroup of students and an area where our state has not invested the effort that it should to best design pathways to set those students up for success. And Grant made the comment about 23% of special education students graduating, and my question about those students would be, not only have they not graduated, but for those 23 who did graduate, what did they do after that? And that's one of the programs, and I have Jenna McAlpin, our Director of Special Education here, and some advocates I see in the room for special education. We, the Tupelo Public School District, have implemented a program called Project Search that's an international program founded in 1996 at Cincinnati Children's. And it involves what is best about Mississippi, which I see as when partners and individuals come together to best meet the needs of students. So Project Search is a partnership with the Tupelo Public School District, with the Mississippi Department of Rehabilitation Services, and with North Mississippi Health Services, our hospital, where we will have, this year we have 8 students who are in their last year of eligibility. They have severe cognitive disabilities, and they are actually going to the high school, having breakfast. We're still meeting all food service. They are then transported. We provide the transportation to the hospital. They have a class focused on employability, job skills, social skills, and then they do 3 10-week internships in different departments across the hospital. And then they come back and they do a class at the end of the day. But Project Search as a program is flipping the script for those kids. If you look at their statistics, their students who finish their Project Search program, 80% of those students are employed after finishing high school. And if you look at the one existing example of that in the state, Rankin County UMMC MDRS, they had 10 kids that started the program last year. 1 dropped for medical reasons. 8 of the 9 that completed the program were employed by UMMC before finishing the school year, and the other is currently, this is from July, was interning and was going to turn into full-term, long-term employment. So that is something, when we as organizations can come together, we know it is a need that we have to be able to address the achievement gap to better meet the needs of our special education students. When we can get individuals that are committed to doing that work and doing whatever it takes, and when we can come together and implement that and implement it well, we're doing what's right by kids. And I think that's just an example of that work, and I would hope that other school districts, I know there are 5 Project Search sites that are starting this year, and I hope that there will be others, and I hope there will be other examples of us identifying needs that we have as a state, coming together as groups to best meet those needs, and sharing that information out so that others can do that great work.
That's a great example of how schools can be innovative. All right, well, we've got some time for questions. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes.
When I Google Louisiana or Florida public schools, the top 3 suggestions by Google are best of, and spring break. When I Google charter schools in Louisiana or Florida, the top 3 suggestions from Google are failure, scandal, and Supreme Court. This isn't surprising considering that Louisiana wasted $23 billion on schools that never opened or opened in less than a year. Mississippi has precious few resources. Why do we think our laws or legislature are better than Florida or Louisiana, which have way more money than we do?
All right. I assume you all heard that, because I heard it, and definitely y'all heard it.
That's a great question. So the movement to get charter schools in Mississippi was really a 10-year fight. And as much as I would have loved to have them 10 years earlier for a lot of kids that would have been able to benefit 10 years sooner, in many ways we benefited from the delay because we learned from states that went ahead of us. And so we were like the 41st state to pass a charter school law, but at least the modern charter school law in Mississippi. And we benefited from the states who learned a lot. And our charter school law, which I'm really proud of and I helped lobby to pass, is a great charter school law. Certainly there are things I would like to see improved, but it is a great charter school law, and it utilized the best practices from around the country. If anything, I think our charter school law is too strict, and the bar is too high to open a charter school, which is why we only have 6 operational after 6 years. But it is an incredibly rigorous bar to get approved for a charter school in Mississippi. And you have to be a nonprofit, you have to do, there's just so many things, which is why we've had 6 approved and I think 30 or 40 rejected. So I'm confident our law and our processes in place that utilize best practices are going to make sure only the best survive. And in the meantime, they're only focused on D and F rated districts. So they're providing an opportunity for kids where they're not getting it already. And I've never understood why the good districts who are performing great have seen charters as a threat, because they're simply not a threat.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm a child therapist, and I have long seen children with emotional disorders not get their needs met in public schools. My questions are two. One is, could that $8 million of special education in public schools get better, so that they could have provided better services for these kids? I have been to IEP meetings where the parents are told, well, we just can't do that. We don't have the money, even though the child needs it. And the other thing, more towards you, Stewart, is have y'all looked into mindfulness programs for an innovative school system? A lot of schools around the country are using mindfulness programs to help children manage their emotions, learn to be kind, to think of others better, and it's a very good way to help reduce problems and improve behavior in the public school system.
Try to summarize it, but essentially you asked about families that have special needs kids that are not being met in the public schools and different strategies like mindfulness. I don't know who you want. What would we recall that?
Well, I made the comment earlier about identifying our greatest needs, and one of those greatest needs was social emotional supports. And so I'm proud that the Tupelo Public School District has reinvested in that. We both are working with training and professional development. We've implemented some programs that are school-wide with chants in some of our safe and civil schools. We sent and invested a lot of money in sending administrators to implement that and implement it well. And that kind of focused last year on student behavior, and now is also focused on teacher behavior. And how do we make sure that teachers in the classroom are helping support those social emotional needs of students? I think when you look at mindfulness, I know of certain teachers that are interested or implementing different mindfulness techniques and strategies. As a part of our district of innovation itself and that innovative work, our focus is really on that college and career readiness. So most of the focus of that application is related to that. And mindfulness, although wonderful, and I hope there are more people doing it, and hopefully it will come out more, is not something that we would need a waiver to be able to implement or do in our schools. So it hasn't been a core tenet of that District of Innovation application, but I am aware of kind of subsets of teachers that are utilizing that. But as a whole, that social emotional, our chants, our commitment to professional development is something that we are emphasizing and working on. And I also know that a subset of that is trauma-informed care. So how are we meeting the needs of lots of students who have adverse childhood experiences? And we all know if you are hungry, if you are homeless, if you are an individual who has a negative home life, that impacts your ability to learn. So that is something as well that also fits in that social emotional, but is something that Dr. Piku, our superintendent, has witnessed the benefits of trauma-informed care professional development, and that's something that we're working on now and looking at that as another way that we can best be prepared to meet the needs of all students.
The special needs and how they're being served.
Well, and just to say, the money that, again, was allocated for the special needs program, the school choice program, did not come out of the students or the money that would have been spent for special education services and traditional education. It was a different pot. And it was intended to serve a different clientele. It's intended to serve students who are not being served or falling through the cracks. So, we got lots to work on in traditional education, in special education, absolutely. I just see it as separate things serving different students.
So all of the money came out of the general fund. It's all in the same pot. And special education this year, for the current year, is underfunded at $28 million. So yeah, it does hurt.
All right.
And there are no vendors in this part of the world without a federal grant. None.
Thank you, Representative Hawley. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
I respect all of you on the stage. I did not know for a long time until I spoke to Grant personally, and I do have a newfound respect for him and what he does. I would say that. Special education in general is a big problem. I have 4 children, 2 are in
Would you
special
mind standing up a little bit just because I'm having a
I'm
little
sure
bit of
the
fan?
fan
Yeah,
is good.
project, read it.
But 2 of my 4 children are in special education. One has autism and one has dyslexia. Those fights have been very different from each other in special education because if you do not have a child in special education, that fight is something you do not understand until you are there. Our SPED director is here. She is in a lot of meetings with me, and I'm very vocal in what I think and bring advocates with me. I know a lot of people in my position feel like there is no leadership in this state who stands up for all of us, who educates parents, we educate ourselves, we educate each other. We've come a long way in this school district. We fight for our own children. But we know MDE's website clearly tells us 1 in 5 children. 1 in 5, that's a lot of children. We're not identifying them early. Is that why we're having better 4th grade test scores? Because we're holding them back in 3rd grade? There's a lot of things that come into play there. The screeners in this state are a joke. There's a lot of children like my own who pass those screeners. We understand that there's still a problem. We pay out of pocket. We go get them tested, and we find out that they're severely dyslexic, just like we always knew. What can we do as a state to know that we're identifying 1 out of 5 children to actually help them and tackle this? This is a tackle. You can attack this problem. This is a teachable problem. But first you learn to read, and then you read and learn, and they are failing from then on out because it affects everything they do. We can do better in this state, and according to MDE's site, themselves, 1 in 5 children. And I would love to know what we can do to be better with dyslexia.
Thank you for that very, very powerful comment. Is there somebody who wants to respond to it in terms of diagnosing special needs? I don't know if that's fair.
I'll say this. We did a study, the Parents Campaign did a study of all 50 states about dyslexia and what they were doing with dyslexia specifically. And I know you're not only talking about dyslexia, but you mentioned the screener. And astoundingly, Mississippi is doing more than just about every other state. It was crazy when we called every state Department of Education, and many of them said, "Oh, we don't use that word. We don't believe that there is such a thing. We think it's just another learning disability." And so we're all learning. I think all states are learning, and we're getting better, but it's a struggle. I mean, it is a struggle, and all those children deserve to be identified, and they deserve our very best. And so we've got to figure it out together, and it's good for you for being vocal. It's what all of our kids need, is somebody to stand up for them and to, work with the school district and make sure that they get what they need. Some of it is resources. I mean, it all goes, a lot of it goes back to resources, but with or without resources, we've just got to make sure that our children get what they need. So I hear you, and I sympathize with Will. But the answer is not to let Will out. I sympathize with all of Will's peers who are also in that school. We got to fix the school. So that's always the answer, is to fix the school.
Yes, ma'am.
It's not the answer to fix the school, Nancy. The answer is to reach the child and teach them in the way that we taught them. Have either you or
Please stand up, ma'am.
Have either you or Grant set an IEP meeting with a parent?
My own child had no IEP.
Really? So, it's not about a building. I'm all for fully funding. All for it. I'm also for school choice. I fought very hard for it, and I've not had the pleasure of being a really long time ago. But the fact is, you said earlier, and you might want to clarify, because it's stung over here in this section, that our major responsibility is to, what was it again? The majority of the children. Well, that, to us, when we hear that, that means way, even if I did take my child out, my taxes would still go to public education. And you're real irritated about that too. What you would miss is butt food. If my child is sitting there and my return on my investment is not getting my child's needs met, well then Jesus, Nancy, what am I supposed to do? You only care about him through 12th grade or test scores. He's mine for the rest of my life. We want to talk about the 60s and the misappropriation, all those things, and awful things our state's known for. What about when my child is out and he's still in Mississippi? He's not a functioning adult. He can't do everything. He's brilliant. He's brilliant. He fights his butt off. And we're not teaching him. He's not at grade level in reading. Not at all. And I don't know, I'm not. For us to talk. I'm passionate about that. And it's very frustrating to hear a panel get up there and talk at me when you have absolutely no idea. We're talking about a certain agenda.
Well,
This is my child.
thank you so much for sharing your opinions. And so you're right, this is a panel, but we really want to have sort of the audience expressing their thoughts. Lindsay, you want to
Sure. And here's what I was saying. When I talked about the obligation to the majority, when we pass legislation, which is what we deal with legislation and policy. We don't get involved in local and individual issues. That's just not what we're structured to do. So when you talk about legislation and policy, almost never are you going to have a piece of legislation or a policy that is perfect for every single child. So what I meant was that what we have to, when we make these choices about policy, we have to write the policy in the way that is beneficial to as the most children that it can possibly benefit. Now, the difference is in what public schools do on a local level, which is different and is not something that we get involved in. The obligation of public schools is to serve the needs of every single child in that school. Every child. And it's not perfect. And it may never be perfect, but public schools have an obligation to serve every single child, to do child find, to find out what their needs are, and to meet those needs. And federal law, as I'm sure you know, says it doesn't matter whether or not public schools are not funded according to the accommodations that they provide. They are given funding, but then federal law says that they must provide whatever accommodation a child qualifies for, whether or not they have funding for it. So, which is difficult in some cases. So it's a problem. It's an imperfect system, and we're working hard to improve it.
Just a quick response, and that is, if you just focus on averages, if you just focus on the majority, if you just focus on macro data, statewide test scores, you end up where we are today with we're failing African Americans, we're failing students in poverty, and we're failing students with special needs because we focused on the average.
That's a philosophical debate. All right, we are towards the end. I know there's still some more hands, so I would encourage you to stick around and we can have a formal conversation. Unfortunately, 2/3 of my panel has to probably drive back to Jackson, so we want to let them go. But I do want to say that September 12th, we will be back here for our next program. It will really be focused...
Hey, just one more question. Just one more question. All right, if you admitted that you're on the legislative level for a majority of it, why can't y'all work together? He's on the majority, the legislative side for the individuals that you miss. Why can't y'all just work together?
Honestly, sir, that's been my secret agenda this whole time. Here's the interesting thing. There are some deep philosophical differences between Grant and Nancy. And so part of the goal of these forums is to kind of, talk about those. But I've been intrigued by how much overlap there's been in some ways. And we didn't know we'd get there tonight. So certainly the goal of this program, civil discourse, civil exchange of ideas, is to figure out ways that we can work together, even while we don't compromise our core values. So that's maybe not a great answer to you, but thank you.
But I would love to work together.
Yeah, okay. All right, let me go back. September 12th, here, next program will be focused specifically on Tupelo. Tupelo as an innovative district, and thinking about that statewide system of accountability, which Stewart didn't really want to go into detail, and I understand that. But let's really talk about what the NDA rules are, how it affects Tupelo, and how Tupelo responds. Finally, we have a sign-in sheet there if you want to learn more about the programs that the Humanities Council supports. We will email you about once a month. We won't abuse it, I promise. But also, we will send you a link to a Survey Monkey to get your response, your evaluation of tonight's program. We find that to be very, very helpful. Thank you very much, everyone.